Hello and welcome to Women in Film's Laptop Cinema Club, the series that brings you intimate conversations with the talented female creatives making the media you love. I'm Ebony Adams, Manager of Public Programs, and I'm delighted to have you join us for a conversation with Ekwa Msangi, the writer and director of the gorgeous new film, Farewell Amor. Ekwa is a Tanzanian-American filmmaker who has written and directed for television and film, including her feature directorial debut, Farewell Amor. Sangi has also written and directed several drama series for mainstream broadcasters in Kenya and South Africa, including The Agency, Mnet's first ever original hour-long Kenya drama series. Along her journey, Msangi has been awarded the Jerome Foundation Grant and Tribeca Institute and Sundance Institute fellowships. Joining her to talk about Farewell Amor and about her career is writer and activist Taiyon Coleman. Dr. Coleman is a 2017 recipient of a McKnight Foundation Artist Fellowship in Creative Prose and a recipient of the 2018-2019 Mirrors and Windows Fellowship. She's an associate professor of English and Women's Studies at St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm delighted to welcome both of them here today, and now I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ebony. Wow. I'm just so honored and happy to be with you here today. And I just want to say again, congratulations on your project.
Thank you.
As we're starting, I just want to, I'm thinking maybe we can talk more about the movie, your inspiration, then a little bit about you, and then see where we go from there. Is that okay?
That's great.
All right. So, in thinking about Farewell Amor, and just congratulations for all its success, can you talk about what inspired you and about the project? And for me, I kind of think of it as it must have been your baby. Can you talk about what inspired it and how you arrived to this point?
Yeah, thank you. So Farewell Amor is inspired by a relationship of an aunt and uncle of mine who were married in Tanzania in the mid-90s. And uncle got a student visa to come to the US and study, and came with every intention of bringing auntie. And at that point, their son was 5 months old, right behind him. And, we sent him off. And, till this day, they are still in the process of applying for visas, having them rejected, applying for visas, having them rejected. And, but still hopeful that one day they will be reunited. One day it will happen. He calls every week, he sends money, auntie's built a home, my cousin's in college. And, I've seen the way it's changed their lives. I've seen the way it's changed the people that, the people they've had to turn into different people in order to stay hopeful that that will happen. And so it was kind of the what if story. What if auntie finally got her visa? If that's no longer the mountain that's in front of them and they're able to reunite all of a sudden, where do you begin at this point after such a long time apart and after having to become different people in order to maintain that hope? So that was the inspiration for it. And, and of course, being an immigrant myself, and of course, seeing the world through that lens and through the lens of other immigrants' experiences, that airport, so I had this image in my head for a very long time of my uncle at the airport, waiting for the family to show up. And what would he say? And what would he be feeling and thinking? And, what would their first meal be? And where would he show, there's been so much anticipation at this point about, our lives are going to be perfect. And so how do you create that, after you've sort of lived in your head for so long? So.
No, it was amazing. And imagine a span of 17 years, right? The story starts after 17 years has happened. Did you imagine it as a screenplay first, or did it exist as a short story? Was it pictures in your mind? How were you thinking about it? I imagine as an artist, you were probably chewing on this. Did you know it was going to be a story? Like I know that you know the story, right? And I think as a writer to writer, I imagine you're always walking around and thinking, wow, I'm going to tell that story. Were you thinking about that at that time? This story?
I got the image of Uncle at the airport. That was like ongoing sort of place that I started. And then a previous film that I had written, directed, and shot won a cash prize at a film festival in Tanzania, actually, which was a small cash prize, which required me to produce another short film and show it at the same festival the following year. And so I was like, all right, something small. I need smallest thing that I can create because it wasn't a very big cash prize. And so I decided to, and I had this image in my head for a long time. So I was like, well, what about the moment before? What about before he goes to the airport? What is he doing? How is he preparing? So I shot Farewell Amor, which is a 10-minute prequel to our feature.
I wish I
And
could
it's,
see that.
yeah, I will send it to you.
Oh, okay, well, thank you. 'Cause
It,
you're doing something interesting, right? Because there's a story, but you slow it down and you take this multifaceted view, right? You have
Mhm.
these three main characters and you revisit that scene in the airport from all three perspectives.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? And know the nerd in me, I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah.
How did you come to that?
It was a little bit of indecisiveness as to whose story I should tell, because it occurred to me that in that moment they're all having the same experience. We're at the airport, yay, we did it, we're together again. But because of who they've become at this point, their individual experiences of the one event is very, very different. And so it was like, I mean, I had done the prequel, and the prequel is about Walter, the male character. Um, but then it felt so he was sort of more accessible when I started working on the feature, but it felt a little cliche to do a story about a guy who had an affair. Or, we've seen that. So then I was like, okay, well, maybe I could, speak from the daughter's perspective, but then at the same time, yeah, he had an affair, but it is a very different story because because of all the things. And so initially I had started writing it from the daughter and the father's perspective. I was like, well, let's just do both and see what happens. And about 6 to 8 months into the writing, it became pretty clear that the mom's story was kind of the linchpin between for all of their stories, and it wouldn't make sense if I didn't have her story in there. So I started again and decided to include her story as well. And just the idea that again, all of them are experiencing the one event, and we
Right,
think that we know what they're experiencing. It's just like, yay, elation, everyone's so happy.
right.
But are they?
Well, I think you know the story, and I want to say from the moment it started, you ripped my heart out of my chest and you didn't give it back to me. Because I have to say to you, and I want to own our perspectives, right? Here I am, I have three kids, I've been married for 22 years. You made me think, wow, this story is very different for me if I were Sylvia's age or if I were younger. So from the moment I know he's cheating, or as we say in Chicago, he's got a side chick, like I'm done. I
Yeah.
think I know the story. I want to kick him to the curb. And you beautifully say, no, Ty, you don't know this story.
Yeah.
Stay with me. And the
Yeah.
intimacy of your lens and how you take moments that we take for granted, like sitting in a car, walking in a hallway, having three people in a very confined space. I felt that uh, your visual lens or perspective said, no, Ty, slow down. And
Mhm.
for a character who I had no empathy for, I didn't want to have, I take that back. I had empathy because we all have those stories of the man that cheats, right? I want to be patriarchal and heteronormative here for a moment. Um, but I didn't have any compassion for him.
Yeah.
You make me care about him. You
Mhm.
make me see the story that I don't want to see. And I caught myself crying several times. But the beauty of how you did that was the very pacing of the story, very deliberate. As they sat with each other, I had to sit with them. And
Yeah.
then seeing from their different perspectives, then that humanity evolves. And in some way, there has been a war in Angola. Here they are, survivors or refugees. And I put that in quotations because do you really survive?
Right.
They're in their own war, right?
Yeah.
um, and
Exactly.
that was beautiful. And I imagine, and you can talk to me about this. I thought to myself, wow, is this the feminist perspective? Is this the woman's perspective that only a woman can tell? And I don't want to be genderizing, but you're right. There is a sense of patriarchy, right? The father has other options to deal with his war. The mother, right, in Tanzania can only have what religion in her women group. She can't go and have an affair, but he can do all these things to cope, but they still uh, come together. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that?
Well, having had the experience, of an affair in my own life, and also coming from the perspective initially of like, well, people just have affairs because they're unserious or they're terrible people or, you know, whatever it is. It's like, I learned, you know, at a younger age, like, oh, it's a lot more it can be a lot more complicated than that. I mean, there are people, I'm suppose, who do it because they're bored or they want to have fun, but you also, you know, there is an aspect of, at least in these characters that I'm, you know, portraying in this film, where, you know, he's lonely and, you know, just like wanting to have human connection. And what was that affair about, you know? And it wasn't just like him just out in the streets in New York trying to party. He was very clear with this woman from the get-go that he had a family, that he planned to, you know, be loyal to them. And, you know, that was his main focus. He had a daughter. And for her as well, that she's not just this slick woman in the city trying to steal people's husbands, but that they had a connection. They developed a connection, probably in a very innocent way. And here we are, you
Yes,
know,
yes,
what do we do?
yes. And I
um,
felt like, and I want to be real clear because I do think there's serious stories of immigration and war and class, you know, colorism, the conflict between African Americans and African immigrants. Like, I mean, it was almost like you used that relationship as a car that carried so many things. But I want to say to you, I thought about what are the houses of love? Like, love is so much bigger than we think it could be. The
right.
capacity of the characters to love in spite of the pain.
Hmm.
At the end, I kept, you know, in my mind, I kept hearing forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness. And I know it's not all about me, but I found myself asking, could I do that? Do I have the
Yeah,
capacity of love and commitment and loyalty and strength to do
yeah,
that? Because, you know, Esther is profound. And I kept thinking of Esther, the biblical character, right? And the trials and tribulations of what she goes through. And Esther was no joke, right? I mean, when she got the mail, so it's like you don't have to come at something head on. Her power was just phenomenal. And the way that she did that, I was like, that was smooth.
yeah.
Um, you know what I'm saying? Like, she said it, but she didn't say it. And I felt in the sense that she was this rock, and we're presented with choices and we choose. Um, your resolution, the action stops, the story doesn't,
Hmm.
but the story ends and I'm hopeful. Or maybe you say, this is life, right?
Yeah.
And here you have this beautiful creature and human being, Sylvia, that their love has created, that she's evidence of how strong that love is.
Hmm.
And the sense of dance is the only place where we can be who we are, and we have to figure out how to do that in spite of all these other very real things
Yeah.
happening. And I want to talk to you about, um, was that intentional, the decision as a director to focus on that internal rather than the external, that even in that internal, they still have choices that create their humanity. Was that intentional on your part?
It was, you know, especially the past 4 years, as we all know, there's been so much rhetoric about the evil of immigrants, the things that immigrants are taking from the resources, the, you know, evil immigrants that are entering our country and taking all these resources from us and raping our women and blah, 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 you know, and that's an old story that we've heard in many iterations across time and history. And we never stop to think about what immigrants give up in order to be in host country, whatever country that is, you know, happens in Europe as well. And, you know, other parts of the world, of course, we never think about, I mean, like, I don't think that there is any person, immigrant or not, who would prefer to leave everyone they know and everybody they love and everything that they're familiar with to go live in some, you know, hardship land, working for pennies because it's so much better to do that. Like, it's not. And even if you talk about refugees or people who are escaping hardships and war and this, that, and the other, for most cases, the people who are escaping those are hardships that were created by the country that we're going to immigrate to begin with, you know, due to policy, due to foreign policies, etc., where you've made it uninhabitable in my own country, where I can't get a job in my own country. And so therefore I have to immigrate by boat or by whatever means to come to you in order to get a job to support my people back home. That's a whole other story. But really wanting to look at the humanity of people, and in this case, African immigrants, but it's true for a lot of other people as well. Um, and and I thought that dance, and these particular dances were intentional on my part as well, because I mean, I think as African heritage people, music and dance is just another language for us. It's another way that we express, it's another way that we soothe ourselves, that we counsel ourselves, that we sort of get healthy and strong to be able to confront the day. It's a way that we also convey history and culture. It's a way that, we educate. When I was a young child, my parents were Fulbrights in California at Stanford, and there was the African Students Union. And as you know, there was a number of us who had been born in the US and did not know Africa in person. And that's how we learned about Africa, was through the music, through the stories, through the, oh, this is when such and so happened. And, there was just so much, you got to see your parents in a whole other light and understand them and sort of where we came from, understand our roots. So there's that purpose as well, the significance of music, music
But
and
it's
dance.
almost sacred, right? I mean,
It
there's a
is.
sacredness. There's the scene, and I hope it's okay. I guess we should have said spoiler alert. But there's a scene when she finds out about Linda, and they're sitting and talking in front of the church, and they're remembering, right? They're
Yeah.
rediscovering who they are, and they're talking about there was a time where they didn't know whether or not they would see their next breath, what happened, but they could dance.
Yeah.
And that dance allowed them to save each other and to discover their humanity. So no, it was very moving to me. And even now I get teary when I think about it.
Thank
And
you.
there's a sense that maybe the body can remember, right?
Yeah.
Your
There's
cinematography around the body, the intimacy of showing their bodies, of touch, of skin, of movement, was very sensual. It was very intimate and very moving. This notion that we can redefine that. So no, I see what you're saying there, and the sense of loss, right? That should that had to have cost them 17 years of being separated, not to mention the 17 years of Sylvia without her father, and is that the price they pay in order to live like human beings, even with
right.
all the other things around? Um,
Thank you for that. I mean, and I will also point out, I mean, those particular dances are from Angola. The reason Angola, I've never been to Angola. I don't speak Portuguese. I haven't been to Angola yet, I will say. But those particular dances, Kizomba, which is a style that Walter practices, is a very beautiful, sensual dance that's specifically from Angola. And this is the country that was under a 30-year civil war. And in that period, they had these underground dances called Kizombas, where people would get together and sort of remember that there was life. And I've practiced kizomba, but I've also read a lot of the history and about the significance of that,
mm,
not only for the people in Angola, but for a lot of the exiles who left as well, as a way of remembrance, as a way of sort of yearning for, and the music that's associated with it and the things that they talk about. And similarly, kuduro, which is the style that Sylvia practices, which is a lot more sort of hip hop looking, it's rough, it's energetic, it's from the streets. And this is the younger people now, 90s, 2000s, and going forward, who don't necessarily have a voice as young people in the community. They don't have a stage, a platform where they can talk about the things that they're going through, but they can express it through their music and dance. And that's what comes out of Kuduro. And so even with, if you look at any music videos online, they look like sort of like your typical hip hop video,
mhm.
but a lot of the content that they sing and dance about actually has to do with a lot of very personal domestic violence, or people sort of having their limbs blow off because there's still a lot of mines that have been hidden around the country, and but just making fun of it too. And I just thought that would be so interesting as a tool to talk about the inner world of Sylvia and her struggle as an African girl. She's not that teenager who's going to rebel and slam doors and talk back to her parents. That's not how she's been raised, but she can express herself through dance. And for her parents, kizomba is a dance that doesn't have a repetitive foot pattern. And so in order to dance to kizomba as a leader or partner, you actually do have to be connected to each other in order to know what your partner wants you to do.
Mm.
And so for a couple that were dance partners and have now fallen out of step, quite literally, how are they able to find each other? How are they able to find steps so that they can lead or follow each other?
And you say that there is no dance pattern. It's almost, that's beautiful. It's almost like life, right? Like there's,
yeah,
it's not scripted. You think it
respond
is.
to the music. That's all it is. The leader is responding to the music. So it's not a repetitive thing that, you know, regardless of what's happening, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, what? No, it's just your leader responding to the music, and the follower has to be connected to the leader in order to know which way to go.
Right. But the risk is the connection, right? Right.
Yeah.
That's the risk, right? That's the leap. I think that's beautiful. Imagine if you would have told that story without the dance. It probably would have been so hard to watch,
Yeah.
right? It's amazing.
I feel like it would have been a little bit more political. It would have been a little bit more focused on like the policies and the issues and
right, and
what
not the spirit.
For and why didn't they get it and what did the visa guy say, which is not what I wanted to discuss at all. Yeah. It was about the human part.
Right. But know that I thought beautifully those issues still came through, though. They just weren't defining them. It reminds me of a documentary, and forgive my ignorance, I forget the name of the director, called Rise, and it's about crump in South Central LA. And he talks about crump dancing in South Central LA having the same effect on those young people, right, as a way of survival, but dealing with heartbreak and just horrendous oppression and poverty and violence. I want to go back to thinking about Walter and thinking about Sylvia, and please forgive my ignorance in advance, but and I don't want to make African identities monolithic, because it's a continent with over 60 countries. Identities and experiences are different. But I think of my husband, who is technically, he's been home to visit, but he hasn't lived at home since 1998. And literally, sometimes all day, he'll watch the music and dance videos all day long.
Yeah.
He'll show our kids and he'll dance with them. And it's a way of connecting, but there's also a way of being different, right? My kids are Tanzanian, but they're not Tanzanian. They're also American. And there's an interesting conversation that Sylvia has with Walter, right? There's all this resentment, right? Because he leaves. There's that beautiful moment where she slips and she prays for him to come home. But there's an irony where he's the one who gives her permission to be who she is, right? Like that was just like, wow, right? Like he gave her that ability. So in all this loss, there is still, though, this beauty, there is this gaining, right? There are beautiful things that come that he's able to see her. And maybe had he not been the bridge between Esther and Sylvia, right, the mother and daughter, maybe that could not have happened. It was almost like they were back in balance. And I wondered if you could talk a bit about that perspective of being a young African woman of the diaspora, being an immigrant to the United States. What's that like? Because I think that's such an important story that I can't speak to because I don't have the subject position. But if you're comfortable, I don't want to objectify you. I'd like you to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different for a lot of different people based on your background and sort of how you got here and under what circumstances, etc. For my own personal experience, I was born in the US. I left when I was 5. We moved back to East Africa. My father was an artist, so he was, a great supporter of creativity and expression and all of those things. And I came back to live in the States as a, later teenager, about the same age as Sylvia, actually 17. And I lived with my older brothers, preparing to go to college. So I did a year of high school before I went to college. And it was a very, unlike Sylvia, I come from an Anglophone speaking country. So language wasn't a barrier for me. I felt that I knew a lot about American culture because we watched all American TV and I had lived here before. And, so the things that I knew were important about American life, like proms and jocks and cheerleaders and, whatever, media tells us. It's
but
a lot more
xenophobia, right? The xenophobia and nativism. I mean, there's a moment in the movie where the girl makes a derogatory comment about her, And I just want to hold space. I know that's not the entire experience, but that's real, right? And we don't
real.
talk about
It's
that.
real. It is, I mean,
And I'm not saying that that was your experience, but I think it took
right.
courage to point that out. Yeah.
No, it is very real. For me, what came at me was mostly not, and this is the late 90s. So this was before Google, before YouTube, and so nobody had a real image of who I was and who my people were and why do you speak English? But why do you speak English that way? And the people who were a little bit more Afrocentric and aware were more aware of West African culture, which is very different from East African culture. And so literally had no idea who I was. But I felt like I knew everything about who America was. And it was really upsetting to me. Like, what do you mean you don't know? You've heard of Mount Kilimanjaro, but you like the idea that there are people that live around this mountain is foreign to you. Like, why? What is wrong with you? So, and that was a battle I fought even in college, because again, like I said, this is pre-imagery, pre-YouTube, pre-sort of easy imagery. Like you had to go to specialized film festivals to hear stories about people. And even till today, I mean, there's a film that was released on Netflix, I think just last year, that's the same sort of trope of white people finding themselves against an African backdrop with some animals in the background. And, so the people are never part of the story. It's always about us either saving some people in distress or just having our own time. And there are no people there. There are animals there. And it's specifically with East Africa. West Africa, people have a few images about the beautiful clothes and some sort of language,
Mm-hmm.
people praying or something like that. South Africa, people have images of apartheid times and, different things like that. But East Africa, people really do think about savannas. And so
Well, I
it's
think
a
we
big
get in
problem.
our own way, and no, it's a long-standing fight between me and my husband because I don't like The Lion King because there are no people right in it. But I think of Sadia Hartman's "Lose Your Mother," right, and this notion that we can never go back. And so, and again, I want to be careful because African American identities are not monolithic. But I think sometimes the ideal or the fantasy of something gets in the way of what it really is, and then you cannot see it. Right? There's this thing
Right.
that you look,
And
but you can't see.
also knowing that this is something that's been supported by media, by politics, by, whatever reasons people put out those kinds of images. There's a purpose to it. So it's not just African American people on their own deciding to imagine certain things other than, other things. Those images have been supported for a very long time. They're the images that have been supported by African Americans too, that are
Yes.
very monolithic and very one-sided. And so even if if you wanted to turn the camera the other way and looking about Africans, what Africans think about African Americans, it is very monolithic because that's what we've been fed for
Yeah.
decades, centuries, about
Well,
the
just
violence,
a
gangs.
byproduct of colonialism and imperialism, right? That continues. I wanted to ask you about your choice and whether this was intentional. I felt, except for her neighbor, which I absolutely adored, that conflict of her neighbor who you initially think that's not going to work, but Esther is stronger than you think she is, right? Throughout the movie, her momentum, you're like, oh, I didn't see you at first, right? But I noticed that the adults were more homogenized than the children. Do you think in
Mhm.
some way it's the young people or these next generations that are shifting it and that are going to make it different? Or does that sound too cliche to you? Like I felt like there was a more chance or opportunity for difference to be within the younger people as opposed to the older characters um, in the movie, particularly the scene with there in the car place and his friend is asking him about Linda and Sylvia and telling him that it's okay, where they're still kind of homogenized, where there's this chance that Sylvia is going to get to be different. Can you talk about that?
That, in my experience at least, in our cultures at home, in our communities at home, there is the societal expectation is a real thing. So living up to what your parents expect, your community, your church community or religious community expects, what has been done by the past however many generations, like that's that's something that people take very seriously. And so even if they don't want to do that, if it's not to their best benefit or whatever the case is, it's not really an option for people to just be like, forget it, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to be me and live my life. And that's in a lot of ways, that's how people survived. You know, that's how certain generations were able to survive, was by like, we're all doing this and we're doing it for the community. So even if it's not great for me as an individual, I'm going to suck it up and, you know, serve the community and serve my parents, my ancestors, my whoever. And there's something very beautiful about that. You know, that's how we got to where we are.
Did you
And
feel that
that is,
similar pressure? You said that your father was an artist. Did you feel that sense of pressure?
he wasn't as he wasn't as strict as probably a lot of other people's parents were. Um, but but the sense of community was very, very clear. Was always very clear. I mean, his art was always in service of the community, for example, or in terms of being a historical counter, or being not a counter, sorry, being able to hold the stories of our people, being able to tell the story, you know, and accurately tell the stories of our people and accurately depict, you know, like he spent years and years. I grew up knowing that all women are curvaceous women, like voluptuous, curvaceous, like that was literally the image in my mind, because all the artwork that he did were dark skinned, curvaceous women. And it wasn't until like much later I was like, oh, women are actually shaped different ways, and how interesting, you know. And he would talk about colorism too, and he would say things like, well, if you just look at people's skin, they just have different undertones, you know. So there's people who have blue undertones, and then people have red undertones, and people have yellow undertones. So I understood it from a perspective of just like a palette of different colors, as opposed to this is good and that's bad. And that was his contribution, but it was always, again, in terms of thinking of the community in a way that I think Western life is a lot more individualized. And so I think our generation, Sylvia's generation, is a little bit having to straddle that a little bit. You know, we're a little bit more inclined to be individualized because we've all adopted capitalistic, you know, cultures.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, and so having to figure out how to keep both, how to keep the community, and also how to keep individualism at the same time, which can be difficult, you know,
Yeah,
depending on what your setup is.
but I can see that sense of responsibility in your work. Um, there's a African American writer, Kiese Lemon from Mississippi, and he talks about that the community will check you. So
Right.
in creating your work, then although clearly you were free to be creative, do you still feel that sense of responsibility that you're creating this film that you want to be proud that, you know, whether it's shown in Angola or in Kenya or in Dar, that people will still respect and say, "Okay, yes, she did us well. She did a good job." Is that important to you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it has to be. It can't be everything, because I know that I'm not going to be able to satisfy everybody all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not possible to do. And we've all had different experiences. So, you know, there's plenty of people, there's no African father who would do that. And it's like, no African father who did that, you know? But, you know, to the most part, at least being truthful to, at least doing the work to be truthful to me and what I know, as much as I can. So in this case, in this film, Farewell Amor, as I mentioned, you know, I've never been to Angola. There's things that I do not know about Angola. And so it was very intimidating to speak on them, you know, because I would be so, I am always so upset when people place their films conveniently in East Africa, and then it has nothing to do with who we are and how we are as people. So I had to do a lot of research. So I did a lot of research, you know, to be really specific about things, you know, to make sure that I might not get everything, but there's certain things I will get. Because I think it's just it's respectful, in the same way that if I were doing a film about Americans in America, they don't even have to be African Americans, but any kind of Americans, and I placed it in Boston, and then all of a sudden everybody had a Southern accent. It was like, I wouldn't be able to be a filmmaker anymore. Like,
Well, I
you know,
thought it was excellent. You know, we did what we say in literature that you suspended our disbelief, right? I believed it. And I felt that the dialogue mixed with endearments, that was very genuine for me. I see Ebony coming on, and I hope it's not over because I wanted to ask you about money and religion and Linda. Did you
uh-huh.
choose not to tell Linda's story? I was so engrossed and so satisfied that I gave myself patience to absorb the three stories. I thought, okay, well, what's Linda's story?
Yeah.
Because she has a story, right?
Yes.
Because unfortunately we are at times. So you're gonna have to you're gonna have to watch the movie. You're gonna have
Oh,
to, develop your own understanding and reading, of the film. And really, this film is exquisite. Ekwa, I can't congratulate you enough on just this beautiful work of art that you have created. I loved seeing this film. So thank you so much for bringing this to us. Thank you for being here today. Ty, thank you so much. I got carried away with the conversation too. So I'm gonna, make sure that people see this film. If you still have questions, then I'm gonna link you to other interviews that Ekwa has done. We're gonna get some answers to these things that we couldn't get to
right.
today. Ekwa, can you tell us, when is the film out and available for people to see?
The film is out in theaters and on all the platforms starting December 11th in North America and December 18th worldwide. So
Perfect,
look
perfect.
forward
And
to
can I just tell Ekwa that if you're in Minneapolis, Minnesota, you have family here, so you're always welcome at our home. It was just an honor
Thank
and pleasure, and just congratulations. I'm excited to see what you're going to do next. So thank you.
you. I
Thank
appreciate
you
that.
both so much. And thank you to the audience who will be joining us. We can't wait for you to see this film and see the phenomenal work that Ekwa has done. And on that note, we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Laptop Cinema Club, where we bring you these kinds of amazing conversations and we introduce you to some movies that maybe you haven't thought of yet, but that you definitely should know. So see you next time. Thank you.